Welcome to our fifth Barod session on our webinar series, the Manifesto Sessions. I'm Sian Roberts, Barod's Operations Manager, and I'll be your chair for today's session. So our topic today is trauma-informed practice. In our manifesto, we call for all substance use services in Wales to be underpinned by a trauma-informed approach. Research from Public Health Wales in 2015 found that 47% of adults in Wales have suffered at least one adverse childhood experience. And there are many other adversities that people can experience during their lives, including racism, discrimination, and structural inequality. Therefore, we all need to understand and talk about ACEs. So we're joined today by an esteemed panel of speakers. Sarah Walsh, the Alliance Manager of our services in Cardiff and the Vale, CAFDAS, Rachel Wilson, Barod's Resilient Families Manager, and Emma Howells, who is the Team Leader for our Choices West Young Person Service. And she is kicking off our presentation today. Over to you, Emma.
So thank you, Sian, for that introduction. So, like Sian mentioned, I'm Emma Howells. I'm the Team Leader for the Choices Service in Dyfed. So you'll also be hearing from my colleagues Rachel Wilson and Sarah Walsh, who are part of the internal trace steering group at Barod and have been instrumental in driving this work forward. So trauma-informed practice and the journey so far, we're going to be mapping out Barod's journey and its involvement with trace. And we're going to be sharing some key insights along the way. During part of this journey, I wasn't at Barod. In 2022, I was fortunate to secure a 12-month secondment with ACE Hub Wales. And for those of you that may not be familiar with ACE Hub, it's funded by Welsh Government and hosted within Public Health Wales. The Hub's mission is to help organisations and communities create environments that prevent, mitigate and respond to adverse childhood experiences or ACEs and their lasting impacts. Ultimately, the aim is to make Wales a world leader in addressing ACEs and trauma. The Hub works towards this by challenging traditional ways of working, encouraging new perspectives and supporting a wider cultural shift, one that helps break the long-term cycle of adversity and trauma. ACE Hub was established following the 2015 research which Sian just touched on into ACEs and health harming behaviour. And this was led at the time by Professor Mark Bellis, who was the Director of Public Health Wales. And while the early focus was primarily on ACEs, over time the work has evolved to include trauma more broadly. So lots of you will be familiar with this document. So this framework aims to help everyone in Wales understand how adversity and trauma can impact people and how to support people who are affected by it. In turn, this will help improve people's health and well-being. So the framework was launched in July 2022 and was developed in co-production with individuals and organisations across Wales with support from Welsh Government. At the heart of this work, the ACE Hub's Trace Toolkit, and I know Sarah and Rachel will both be touching on the Trace Toolkit. So I'm not going to go into great detail about it because it will be covered later on in our presentation. The Trace Toolkit is a practical resource designed to help organisations embed ACE awareness and trauma-informed practice into their everyday operations. The Toolkit self-assessment process encourages reflective learning. It helps organisations recognise areas of existing strength while identifying opportunities for improvement. A key principle throughout is meaningful engagement and inclusion, ensuring that everyone who interacts with the organisation, and that includes colleagues and people that access our services, that they have a voice in shaping how those services are delivered. The phrase trauma-informed practice is now widely used when we discuss responses to adversity and trauma. However, until recently, there has been no shared understanding of what being trauma-informed truly means in practice. And across Wales, many services, organisations and sectors have adopted trauma-informed approaches, but the lack of consistency has made it challenging to coordinate efforts effectively. And I guess this was a huge learning when I kind of went over to the Hub first. I thought that the Choices Service in Dyfed was trauma informed, and there was, I was very confident that kind of we had it nailed. However, when I got there and kind of saw the 6 key domains within the TRACE toolkit and the self-assessment, I quite early realised that yes, there were amazing examples of good practice, but there was still lots more that we needed to do to say that we were kind of on that journey to being trauma informed. So that's where this framework makes a difference. It provides a shared national definition that applies across all sectors, from universal services to specialist care, and even within communities and wider systems of support. The aim is to establish a common foundation that helps reduce the occurrence of trauma, prevent and mitigate its harmful effects, and supports recovery, healing and growth. In essence, the Welsh trauma-informed approach sets out a vision for how care and support should be provided, promoting a holistic, compassionate and inclusive response to trauma that truly meets people where they're at. And I guess from my experience of working with Hub, that's definitely something that I've brought back with me to the work that I do within the team in Choices and in Barod in general. So in 2022, with additional funding committed by Welsh Government, the ACE Hub were able to expand this offer to the substance use sector, and I was successful in gaining that role. By the time I joined ACE Hub in 2022, work with the substance sector had already started, and with a particular emphasis on developing a train the trainer package. So the initial focus was to connect with the expert reference group. So they'd come together initially in around 2020 to establish this training package. So my role was to reconnect with that group that had originally come together to support that training package. This group played an important role in overseeing the progress of trauma-informed practice within the substance use sector. The ERG was made up of a range of partners, heavily involving commissioners across Wales, representatives from Welsh Government and the Prison Service. And through this group, we were able to identify services and organisations that felt ready to begin embedding trauma-informed practice within their settings. It was through these discussions with commissioners in Gwent that invited ACE Hub to present to the Engage service that Sarah was then the service manager of. And following that presentation to the Engage service and partners, Sarah approached Caroline and Hugh to secure that all-important senior leadership buy-in, a crucial step in making sure that work could be impacted and be meaningfully implemented. So the presentation delivered by ACE Hub introduced the TRACE toolkit, a key resource designed to help organisations assess where they are on their trauma-informed journey and then to plan their next steps. I guess the Gwent commissioners were particularly keen to get the young person service on board because GDAS, which is Gwent Drug and Alcohol Service, the adult service in that area, were one of the trailblazer organisations working to embed trauma-informed practice and had undertaken that TRACE toolkit approximately 18 months prior to Barod commencing on their journey. There was lots of learning that came out from the GDAS's journey, and this was captured in the external evaluation conducted by Bluebo Consultancy. So Bluebo were recruited in order to capture that 12 months of the work and that initial pilot with the substance use sector, and they produced an evaluation report over from that 12 months work. So the purpose of the evaluation was to help ACE Hub understand how substance use organisations were using the TRACE toolkit in practice. And what I will say is not one organisation embeds the TRACE toolkit in exactly the same way. Everybody's quite bespoke, unique, because it moulds itself to kind of your organisation, which is a real kind of key asset to that TRACE toolkit. It aimed to inform future development of the resource and to shape how the Hub's ongoing support offer to the sector. The evaluation team role was to observe the progress of the pilot and provide formative feedback to ACE Hub Wales and monitor the work of both the expert reference group and the community of practice. And the community of practice I'll touch on in the next slide. So this approach allowed data and evidence to be gathered throughout the duration, engagement with lots of the sites that were kind of engaging in this process. Barod were part of those conversations, and enabling the evaluators to share emerging insights and recommendations as the work evolved. There were 13 key recommendations in total. I'm not going to go through them all today, but all these resources that we talk about, the trauma framework, the substance use evaluation, they're all downloadable documents on ACEHub's website. So I've picked out some of the key recommendations, and one of those was keeping that conversation going. And that was to focus on continuing the work within area planning boards. So the APBs and service commissioners were really heavily involved in the conversations. But it was to explore how trauma-informed practice could be built into local service planning and tender processes, and gradually and collaboratively. And I guess we've seen that emerge as time has gone on. So, you know, we're talking about 3 years ago that we started to have these conversations with commissioners, and things have started to change. I've definitely seen kind of this being brought into definitely service planning and tender processes, not just as tokenistic words that appear in the document, but actually kind of really unpicking that kind of meaning behind that, which is really positive. There's still more work to do, but like with that trauma journey, there's no distance. It's that kind of journey that we're on. A second key recommendation would be clear leadership and direction. So this was encouraging strategic stakeholders that included Welsh Government to provide clear leadership at a policy level, helping organisations understand how trauma-informed practice fits alongside other key national priorities. And this is really crucial. We need to have that kind of clear vision leadership at a policy level in order to influence change. And then we know that people that access our service don't just access substance use services, they have touch points with a load of other different services, from housing, criminal justice. So it's about continuing to emphasise that trauma-informed practice works best when it's adopted across entire systems and not just having individual pockets scattered here and there. Reinforcing this message will help ensure a consistent and a unified approach. So, during my time at the Hub, there was great emphasis on getting organisations from a multiple range of sectors. So I didn't just work with substance use services. I worked with housing associations, higher education, further education settings, and obviously then with substance use services across Wales. And the Hub were in talks with the police and colleagues in health to see how larger scale organisations could commence their journey when I left in March this year. So, you know, it doesn't just stop. That work is continuously evolving, and I know there's a lot of emphasis in secondary education at the minute. So we did a big chunk of work in further ed, so that's kind of shifted a little bit now to focus in secondary education schools as well. So the Trace Toolkit will be covered in the presentations, and Barod will kind of go through when Rachel and Sarah are delivering and kind of go through those different self-assessment domains and kind of explore that a little bit in more detail as we kind of talk through this presentation. So I touched on in my previous slide the Trace National Community of Practice. So this was a key deliverable that was part of my role when we were at ACEHub, and this attracted strong participation from a wide range of organisations. These sessions centred on shared learning and the development of trauma-informed practice, creating a safe space for stakeholders to reflect, share challenges and learn from one another. And I guess that's the beauty of trauma-informed practice. It's not kind of everybody's rushing to do their own thing. It's about sharing that learning, sharing from one another. And if there are challenges, trying to unpick those and seeing what's worked for one organisation that can be transferred on to another one. The community of practice has added significant value to the Trace Toolkit, helping to drive momentum in embedding trauma-informed approaches. Practitioners from different sectors particularly valued the chance to collaborate, exchange ideas and develop shared solutions. This cross-sectoral engagement is a positive sign of progress towards a whole systems approach. ACEHub also noted that both the expert reference group and the community of practice have strengthened communication between area planning boards and service providers across Wales, further supporting their ambition to build a cohesive trauma-informed system. Throughout our engagement with the community of practice, we were constantly asking for feedback on what additional tools or resources could strengthen and enhance the Trace Toolkit offer. And one of the key pieces of feedback we received was a request for guidance on how to develop a statement of commitment. And this features in one of the key domains around leadership and governance. People were asking for a template statement of commitment, but what we learned was it very much needs to be built on the vision and the beliefs and the values of an organisation. So in response, members of the community practice collaborated with ACE Hub to co-produce a guidance document on how to create a statement of commitment. Colleagues from Barod, Higher Education, Probation and Mental Health Services came together to share their insights and expertise and ensuring the guidance was practical, inclusive and relevant across sectors. In addition to this, there was also a request for guidance on how to create a trauma-informed physical environment. So exploring how our spaces can promote safety, trust and well-being. This again was a collaborative input from the community of practice. And then finally, a lot of our work entailed creating or supporting a universal e-learning resource, very much based at that trauma aware level, to create accessible, consistent learning on trauma-informed principles. This resource supports a shared understanding across the workforce and helps to embed trauma-informed values into everyday practice. All of these resources, like I've said, can be accessed from the Hub's website. So a key takeaway from my time at the Hub is that this type of change doesn't happen overnight. We would often get asked, oh, well, how long will this take? Can it be achieved within 6 months? An example of this, Barod have been on this journey, on their trace journey for the last 3 years, and we still have plenty more to do. As an internal trace steering group, we're continuously going back and reassessing our action plan. And it's very much, we think we're ahead of the game and then we will unpick and it's like an onion with lots and lots of different layers. Other things will kind of fall out from that. Securing senior leadership buy-in from the onset is crucial. Many organisations that haven't done so, despite having passionate teams that are definitely pushing the boundaries in terms of trauma-informed practice, have struggled to create meaningful impact. And this goes, when we look at the domain around policies, you know, if I wanted to change a policy, I would have very little impact within the organisation, within the wider organisation. And that's why having that senior leadership buy-in from the onset is crucial in terms of resourcing, staff's time to kind of commit to that, and then to kind of create that meaningful impact. And then finally, it's vital that the internal steering group includes representation from across the organisation. So at Barod, there's approximately 20 plus staff that are included in that invite list to our Trace internal steering group. And we've got representation from HR, from frontline staff, service managers, team leaders, and it ensures that every layer of that organisation has a voice in shaping that process. So that's it from myself. I'm now handing over to Rachel, that's going to take you through how it all began.
Hi everybody, I'm Rachel Wilson and I'm Resilient Families Manager for Barod, and I manage the Choices West service in Dyfed, co-manage DDAS and also Floating Support in Ceredigion. I'm going to take you through how it all began, a bit of a history journey for our trauma-informed practice. So it started back in 2022 when I was managing Choices West and Sarah was with Engage, and our two services attended a Repairing the Damage ACEs training. And it was, I think it was a 3 or 4 day training and a massive manual at the end, which was, for us at the time, quite groundbreaking, and our staff absolutely embraced that learning and wanted to take it further. So Sarah and I had meetings. How could we follow this up? How could we embed the learning within our two services? And we came up with this idea that maybe what we needed as part of our assessment was a monitoring tool that actually monitored young persons' ACEs so that we could recognise that within our assessment paperwork. So this monitoring tool project was embryonic at its time, but the project started to develop a bit further. If you can have the next slide, Dan. So what we did then at that point was we developed a task and finish group with representation from all of the young person services across Barod. So that was with Clontarf, Swansea. We didn't have Cavdas at that time, but we did have Gwent, and they all came on board and they worked together really comprehensively and developed an ACEs monitoring tool, plus the guidance document that would take the services through what they could talk with that young person at the point of assessment. We then took that paperwork and we piloted it. We had a 3-month pilot in each of the areas. So we had a key person in each area that would actually take that and use that as part of their assessment paperwork. After 3 months, we reconvened, and as in all good pilots, you know, it's going to go one way or another way. The feedback was that actually this was not a document that was fit for purpose. The main feedback on that was because it was repetitive. We were already gathering that information during our assessment through really professional curiosity and good discussions with our service users at the time. Coincidentally, at that moment, Emma was seconded into the ACES Hub, and that was quite fortuitous for us, because alongside this monitoring tool pilot that we began, myself and Sarah began working with our own services independently with Emma to explore the larger self-assessment tool. And as we were working through it, we identified evidence for each of those 6 domains that Emma has previously talked about in her slides this morning. And very quickly, Sarah and I identified that actually what we needed was, it was no good me doing something in Dyfed and Emma and Sarah doing something in Gwent. We needed an organisational approach that embraced the whole organisation and every project within that. So our approach was, as Emma's already touched on, that governance, leadership and organisational culture. We had to make ACES and TRACE part of our organisational culture and bring in governance and leadership from as high as our directorship. And we're very lucky at that time that our Director of Operations came on board with this and took a very active role in this approach at the very start. We recognised that all our policies and procedures at the time that they needed review, whether it's 12 months, 24 months in advance. We needed to adapt those policies and procedures, and we needed to bring in trauma-informed language. We needed to make them easy read. We needed to make them a lot shorter. Some of our documents were extremely long. You know, you're talking about 30, 40 pages, and we had to bring them down to where everybody could read them, in the recognition that our staff also needed to be trauma aware, but may also be experiencing trauma themselves. So we had to make that adaptable for all. Our e-learning package was worked on and developed, and it has taken even a further stance on that now, which I know Sarah's going to talk to you a bit later on about our workforce training. But as part of that now, everybody at point of induction has an e-learning package on ACES and TRACE to work through as part of their induction. Our physical environments, the places where we work, the places where we see our service users, is vitally important. The steering group worked on an audit tool, which meant that we could go round our bases, our physical environments, and audit how accessible they were, how welcoming they were, how welcoming our teams were. Sometimes it can be quite difficult for service users to come to a building and just ring a bell and wait to be answered. You know, it's really important for us to be able to recognise that we need to meet and greet people, welcome them with hello, a glass of water, take a seat in a welcoming area, make sure that the room in which they're seen is comfortable, it's bright, it's airy, it's not intimidating. So all of those things are part of that physical environment. And what we actually developed was not only an audit tool for our staff, but also an audit tool for our service users. So we got our service users' perspective on those environments as well. And that was really, really important for us, and a really good example of how we can co-produce environments to benefit the needs of both staff and service users. As Emma touched on earlier as well, we've got our service delivery and design, where we are starting to see now, when tender documents come out, that APBs and commissioners are embedding trauma-informed practice throughout that. And when writing a tender, you would have to embed that learning within that. And of course, monitoring and evaluation. What we recognised sort of quite early on is that monitoring and evaluation can't be left to the end. As Emma said earlier, this piece of work is ongoing. There's no deadline. So it's not like after 12 months we're going to evaluate it. This could go on for 5, 10 years. So what we need is constant monitoring and evaluation. We're always re-looking at what we're doing, monitoring how it's working, changing and adapting as our scenes and our environment change as well. So what we did, we engaged a wide range of colleagues into the process. And again, as Emma already touched on, we brought in people as part of our steering group. And we brought in caseworkers, we brought in our admin staff, we brought in team leaders, service managers, directors, HR, learning and development. They were all part of this process. So we had a really wide range of people steering this project through the organisation. We were harnessing that desire for change, harnessing the desire to do the best for our service users, and recognising that it's much more about leadership, not just more management. We don't want some saying, right, you're going to do this. We wanted everyone to buy into it and recognise this is what we want for ourselves and for our service users and for our organisation. So it was a head and heart piece of work, not just head. And it was one organisational approach. And it's a large organisation. We're covering a lot of Wales. But by having that buy-in from every strand of our services, made it all the more worthwhile and all the more easy to embed any change and develop any action plan that would come from that. So we formed the steering group, as I've said, with all of these people, and we started to draft our action plan. And our action plan was one of collaboration, looking at how we brought everybody in, how we recognised that, how we worked with our teams, how we worked with our different role designations as well, and with our service users to make our assessments, our interventions, our environments as welcoming as possible. Looking at the language we used within those pieces of work, not just our policies and procedures, but within our assessment tools as well. We've just done a big piece of work within Dyfed where we've actually re-looked at our assessment tools and made them a little bit more friendlier, particularly young person friendlier as well. Looking at our documents, making them easy read, making them young person friendly, using the correct language that isn't re-traumatising for everybody. And recognising across the organisation that trauma-informed practice is for everyone, and embedding those 5 practice principles within our everyday work. As part of something we did within the steering group was we actually asked the steering group, what did trauma-informed practice mean to them? And they came up with these sort of 5 terms: that it would be flexible, it would be needs-led, be all-inclusive, we would have professional curiosity, and we'd be influenced by the organisational culture. And I think that last one is quite important because staff do move on, they do progress, but if that culture is embedded, the new staff coming in will automatically embed that culture, and they'll automatically have a sense of worth for themselves and for their service users as well. So we developed our action plan, and the action plan that we've already completed, and it's still ongoing, and we're still due to review it. I think next week we're having another review. But so far what we've already done is we've set up that steering group and embedded a communication forum for the entire group. We gathered baseline data on our staff's understanding of trauma-informed practice, which was gathered at a Barrott Development Day. Not only have we done that once, but we've done that twice, which actually shows how that we're monitoring progress and change throughout the organisation. We don't just do it once and leave it, we monitor it and we keep it going. We've developed an e-learning package for all staff, which is part of the induction process. And we're always exploring more opportunities for comprehensive training, and Sarah's going to touch on that in the next few slides. Trace has been added to all meeting agendas, including management meetings, including team meetings, and including our staff rep meeting as well, who provide regular updates. There was a big piece of work undertaken for recruitment when we reviewed that. And we recognised again that quite often, you know, when somebody comes for an interview, that in itself can be quite a traumatizing experience. Everybody is very, very nervous about interviews. They always want to give their all. They always want to do their best. But what we did notice was that Sometimes people get very anxious about where they're going to go, who they're going to meet, where they're going to park the car, and do they have to walk to the office. So as part of our recruitment review, when we invite people for interviews now, we actually send them a map of where the venue is, let them know where they can park, whether there'll be a charge. We show them a little map of how to get to the venue. We also let them know who'll be on the panel. We let them know who'll greet them at the door. And also, once they arrive, not only are they greeted in a warm, comfortable space that's been environmentally audited, but they're offered a glass of water, and they're offered the questions as well for 10 minutes prior to the interview. So they have a chance to read through those questions, gather themselves, make a few notes, and come into the interview fully prepared and far less anxious than they would have done. And that has been a process that was at the time for us quite revolutionary, but is now really embedded within our culture. It's what every project does across the organisation, and it's working really, really well. We're noticing that candidates are far less anxious, and some of the feedback we've had from the candidates is that they've really appreciated that process, appreciated knowing where to park, appreciated having the questions beforehand just so that they can prepare themselves. And it's worked really, really well for us. We designed and we piloted the environmental audit tool across the organisation. We're in the process of repeating that across some of the projects now, so we can ensure that we're maintaining that. And the ACES monitoring tool project was completed. We've communicated to all the Barod staff about the group's existence. There's an extended invitation every time we meet for anyone to attend the steering group. From whatever designation of role they hold within the organisation, they're welcome to attend. And it's always a very well attended group, because some people may just want to attend for one particular piece of work, and then they may drop out and they may come back again in a couple of months' time. Others will come to every single meeting because they really want to drive that forward. Whatever people want to do, it's really okay with us, because their input and their interest and their dedication towards getting this embedded is really, really welcome and worthwhile. So finally, just to summarise what we've done, is that now trauma-informed practice is part of our Barod strategy. We've got the steering group well embedded and an action plan that is constantly under review. Our service delivery plans include ACEs and trauma-informed practice, and we're seeing tender documents being written now with that in mind. And our communication, we're regularly updating the staff briefing. We have team meetings, it's on our agenda. It's always at the heart of what we do within Barod organisation. And that's all from me. So I'm going to pass you now on to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit more in depth about the policies and the training we offer.
Thank you so much to Emma and Rachel for taking us through our trauma-informed practice journey that we've been on so far in Barod. It's actually been a really lovely opportunity to reflect on all the development work that we've actually done over the past 3 years. And I think, very much as Rachel said, where we thought we were going to be going with the journey 3 years ago, it's actually ended up going on a completely different journey from what we originally anticipated. But I think what Emma picked up on earlier in her part of the presentation around, actually, we very much need to recognise there is no end goal with this piece of work. We don't have a task and finish group for a reason. It's a steering group. And it's because this work needs to continually be ongoing. Trauma-informed practice needs to continually be a priority for us as an organisation. And it very much needs to be threaded through all of the work that we do. It really needs to be about our interactions with our staff, our interactions with our service users, even our interactions with our partners, and how we interact with our communities. Almost as much as harm reduction is a principle that's threaded through all of the work that we do in the substance use field, trauma-informed practice needs that same level of priority and really needs us to focus on it. So I'm going to talk you through now kind of some of our future plans, because whilst we recognise we have made huge strides, we do also recognise that there is more work to do. So as Emma and Rachel have both referenced quite heavily in their parts of the presentation, much of the work that we've done within Barod is very much focused on the 6 domains within the self-assessment framework that was developed by the ACES Hub. And we will continue to focus our work around these 6 domains. So I'm just going to break down each of those 6 and just give you a bit of a flavour for what our plans are coming up. So starting with governance, leadership and organisational culture. And you've heard already this morning just how important it is that we have that buy-in from that overarching governance structure within the organisation for it to actually work. When Rachel and I first started this piece of work and thought, oh, we could just actually do this from a young person's perspective within our own individual services, it very quickly became clear that we needed to have that overarching organisational approach to being able to drive this work forward. So in terms of our Barod strategy, quite timely, we actually had a Managers' Day last week to review the strategy. And it was really interesting that trauma-informed practice didn't actually feature in our strategy. And the reason being is because that strategy was written and developed in 2021, prior to when we started this piece of work. But what was really positive in terms of that review session was that there was a strong voice in that room in terms of how important it is that trauma-informed practice needs to feature in our new revised strategy moving forward. And that is something that we will be advocating as a steering group to ensure that that is an essential part of our strategy. So our steering group, which you've heard quite a lot about already this morning, will continue to drive forward the work of our action plan. And we've got a meeting scheduled for Wednesday this week, actually, to review that action plan, because looking at that, there are actually a lot of pieces of work that we have made huge strides in. And so now is a really good opportunity for us to refresh some of those goals and look at what our plans are going to be moving forward. We need that to then filter down into individual service delivery plans. And we recognise an important part of that is ensuring that we've got that communication and we've got the right communication forums and communication mechanisms set up. So after every steering group meeting, we always put a big overview in our staff briefing to ensure that everybody's updated on what we're doing and what the focus of our work is. And again, as Rachel mentioned earlier, is part of all of our team meeting agendas. And that enables the work of the group to feed into those team meetings, but it also creates an opportunity for information to come from teams into the wider group as well, to ensure we've got that two-way communication. We have the next slide, please. Okay, lovely. So in terms of our policies and procedures, as you've already heard this morning, we've made some significant changes to a number of our policies and procedures within the organisation. And it's about continuing with that work and ensuring that any new policies and procedures or any reviews that happen are done so with a trauma-informed lens. And the ACES Hub developed a fantastic resource to support with this. And so they developed a policy guidance document. We very much be utilising that document to support us with all of that review process. In terms of workforce training and support, you've heard this morning how we have made some great strides with rolling out training across the organisation. So we rolled out the e-learning training package. That was aimed very much at that trauma aware level. And we recognise actually a lot of our staff within the organisation are directly working with people that have experienced trauma or are still continually experiencing trauma, and actually need training at more of that trauma skills and trauma enhanced level. So in order to support them with that, we have utilised some really fantastic training providers over the past couple of years to deliver some of that training. But what we plan to do now as a group is to ensure that we can deliver some of that training ourselves in-house, and that enables us to keep that consistency with that training and ensure then that it's not just the staff are going on training, but that they're also being supported after they've been on that training to embed it fully into their practice. So we have worked really closely with Trauma Stress Wales to look at embedding their tips training across the organisation. So we'll be looking at developing that training to ensure it's got a substance use lens, and we're planning to roll that out in the new year. And we've also developed a Space for Trace handbook for staff. So this handbook will ensure that all staff, when they start with the organisation, so as part of their induction, they have a really thorough overview of what trauma-informed practice is, what it means to work in Barod, and to adopt a trauma-informed practice approach, working with, so tools and techniques, and also information that's really important for staff around vicarious trauma and vicarious resilience. So we'll be looking at rolling that handbook out in the new year. And we are also going to be embedding reflective practice into the organisation to ensure that all of this training can be embedded into daily practice. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that's just an example of our Space for Trace, our handbook. Next one. Okay, so again, talked quite a lot about the work that we've done around physical environments. So we developed our own audit tool. To coincide with that, the ACES Hub are also developing a guidance document around physical environments, and also developing a more universal audit tool that could be used. So we are now due to refresh all of our audits across all of our spaces within the organisation. So we're going to be utilising the ACES Hub audit to enable us to do that. I think it was such a fantastic exercise that we did when we did our audits across all of our services. There was so much learning and so much positive change that came from that. So I think this will be a really good opportunity for us to look at, have those changes that we implemented been sustained, and are there further changes that we need to look at making to ensure our spaces are safe and welcoming for our service users. Okay, and then coming on to service design and delivery. So you've heard today that lots of new contracts, we're seeing that service specifications are starting to incorporate trauma-informed practice, which is really, really positive to see. But it's also about, from our perspective, when we are writing tenders and writing our bids, that we are ensuring that from the onset we are incorporating trauma-informed practice in our response. I was involved in the recommissioning of the Gwent Young Persons Service a couple of years ago, and we agreed from the beginning that trauma-informed practice was going to be one of our key principles that we were going to include in all of our responses for that bid. And it's about making sure that that's set up from the very start of new contracts, but also about continuing to review the processes that we are following within our ongoing service delivery. So Rachel talked about in Dyfed, they've recently reviewed their assessment form to ensure that that's more trauma informed. In CAVDAS, we've recently done an exercise to develop a screening tool. We recognise that assessments can be really intrusive for people, they can be really lengthy, you know, and we are asking these questions, quite in-depth questions for people when they very first come into service. And actually our focus needs to be around building those relationships, ensuring people feel safe, and ensuring that people feel comfortable enough to engage with our services. So it's about developing a screening tool that just asks the need to know information at that very initial stage, so that those kind of more in-depth questions can be asked when people feel more comfortable and more able to respond to that. I think that ensuring that we are hearing from our service users is an area that we need to improve on. I think that we do that a lot, but I think there is scope to improve that even further. And we really need to understand what trauma-informed practice means to those that are engaged in our services, and learn how can we do this better? What can it look like in terms of making improvements? Okay, so the last domain then. So we battled with monitoring and evaluation in the very beginning. I remember having lots of conversations with Emma and saying, oh, I think we'll pick this up further down the line. We don't need to look at monitoring and evaluation yet. Let's focus on the service design and the service delivery. That's the most important bit. But actually, as Emma very much reiterated to us, it's so important, because ensuring we're monitoring and evaluating what we're doing feeds into the work that we're doing, and gives us that focus in terms of what we need to be focusing on. So just a couple of things that we've done and some of our plans in terms of this area. So we were lucky enough to be involved in a large-scale research project with MEL. They were evaluating the ACES Hub toolkit, and as we had utilised that toolkit to inform much of our work, we were part of that study, and that has now been published. And it was a really great opportunity, again, actually, to reflect on how far we've come and all the work that we've done. Rachel's already touched on the staff baseline data that we collect at our Barod Development Day, which looks at staff understanding of trace. It looks at their confidence in delivering a trace-informed practice. It looks at how important staff feel it is that we are working in a trauma-informed way. And it also looks at what staff feel should be our priorities in terms of the 6 domains. And the findings over the 2 years have provided us with some really rich information to inform our planning in the steering group. So I'm looking forward to repeating that exercise now at the end of this year. And I have put in the slides, which I'm sure will be shared with you, just a snapshot of that data over the past 2 years. I think it's going to be really important as well that we evaluate our new training when we roll that in January, and also our handbook, and that we ensure that it's effective and that any changes that need to be made can be implemented with a review. And I think it's really important that we'll continue to engage with our service users for feedback. So that's just a little bit about what we're planning to do over sort of the next year as part of our work within Barod and within the steering group. And I think it's just a really nice point to finish on the manifesto that Sian reiterated at the start. So very much included in our manifesto is that we want all substance use services in Wales to be underpinned by a trauma-informed approach. We call on Welsh Government to implement core standards relating to trauma-informed practice within substance use treatment services in Wales and build upon the actions outlined within the revised edition of the Substance Use Delivery Plan. And we call on area planning boards to ensure substance use treatment services in their localities embrace a whole system trauma-informed approach, and for the respective workforce to be adequately skilled in delivering such an approach. And, as Emma mentioned right at the start, we've talked you through some of the work that we've been doing within Barod, but we feel it's really important that that is supported by that wider framework and that wider system, because actually trauma-informed practice impacts us all. And I think that it's about everybody working in this trauma-informed way, rather than it happen in isolation within individual organisations and services. That's me.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to all 3 of you for that fantastic presentation and overview of what we've been doing in Barod over the last few years to progress on the trauma-informed agenda. We have only got 7 minutes left, so we're going to try and get through as many questions as possible because there's some brilliant ones in there. So the first question, Rachel, is for you. Do Barod offer a consultancy service where you'd look over organisations' policies and offer comment on how they could be more trauma-informed?
Sort of, yes. Certainly within the Choices West Young Person Services, we have gone into some schools and educational settings and been asked to look at their policies for substance use particularly. And we have made suggestions as to how they could implement their policy development within that. So we haven't historically been asked to go in and advise on any trauma-informed practice, but we have done it from a substance use perspective. I don't know if, Sarah, you've had any experience of that in Cavdas or within Gwent as well?
No, but I would just say, just in terms of picking up what I referenced in the slides around the policy guidance document by the ACES Hub, that would be a really good reference point, I would say, to utilise, because actually, I mean, you were involved in developing that, weren't you? I think that gives a really good framework.
Yeah, I mean, it was co-produced by a range of sectors, but it crosses into any organisation, any sector. So it's kind of not just specifically for substance use or housing. So those practical kind of guidances are there, they're accessible, and they're a good starting point for reference. I know sometimes it is daunting when people are kind of looking at that domain area and looking at their policies, they get caught up in what language to use, and you know, it's about kind of looking at what that means for an organisation and kind of taking on board, you know, that organisation's values. But it is a lengthy process.
Thank you. There's a question for you as well, Emma, that follows on nicely from that answer. What advice would you give to any other organisations watching or listening today on where to start if they're at the beginning of their journey?
So as part of ASHUB's offer, there's a readiness checklist, and that's got 5 areas for people to kind of consider. So it very much looks at, have people got that senior leadership buy-in? So what we've noticed is those that haven't done that at the start, that preparatory kind of work, whilst they've got passionate teams kind of forging forward, that kind of sustained, meaningful implementation kind of falls short sometimes. So really important to get that senior leadership buy-in, because this isn't a piece of work that's going to have additional funding. From Sarah and Rachel's kind of perspective, this has been an additional part of their really busy workload anyway. So it's making sure that an organisation appreciates that and will set time aside for people to invest in that. So there's 5 different principles in total, and it's really good point. That readiness checklist is a really good place to start when organisations start on their journey. The Trace community of practice, there's loads of shared experience. I'm not sure when the next meeting is, but I know the one last focused on the launch of their evaluation of the Trace toolkit, which MEL conducted. And that kind of, there's a space on ASHUB's website, which is Trace space, not a space for Trace, so could get confused. But again, there's loads of resources. There's loads of webinars that will kind of map out kind of individual services journeys. What I will say, it's very much bespoke. Not 2 organisations will approach it in the same way. Barrod's journey was very different from Adveriad's journey. And then if you look at other kind of organisations in different sectors, everybody embraces it in a very different way.
Thanks, Emma. I can see that there's a comment from Chief Inspector Jenna Jones, who is saying that they're right at the beginning of their self-assessment stage now, and it can be quite daunting doing that in a police force. So that she's asking if she can reach out for support after this, and whether we'd be happy to do that, which I know of course we are. So yes, the slides will be available, Jenna. We can get those out to you as well. Sarah, one for you. What has been the hardest part of the Trace journey, and what would you say has been the best part?
Oh, that's a great question. I think probably the hardest part was getting started, because it just feels a bit daunting and a bit overwhelming in the beginning. And actually, as Rachel talked about, we went off in the wrong direction. But actually, that was okay, because there was some learning from that. You know, I think we initially thought, right, we'll develop a tool, you know, we'll collate ACEs, and that'll inform us. And it was completely off pitch. It was not the direction we should have been going in. So it was getting started, really, which would probably be the biggest challenge. And I think the best thing has been just the buy-in that we've had from across the organisation. And I hear everywhere I go now, I hear trauma-informed practice just being regularly talked about. It has felt like it's become part of the conversation within Barrod. And I just think, actually, you know, hearing when we have our Trace steering group meetings, we just ask for feedback around the room in terms of anything anybody wants to share in terms of pieces of work they've been doing. And there's just some amazing pieces of work happening on the ground, and I just love those meetings. I always come away feeling really, really positive. So yeah, that would be my best bit.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm sure you'd all have loads to add to that question as well, but we are out of time. But thank you to you all for attending today's webinar. We look forward to seeing you and other colleagues at our next webinar on Thursday, the 6th of November, where we'll be talking about the importance of involving young people in the design and delivery of services. And you can access the link to book on to this event in the chat or via our website. A huge thank you to Sarah, Rachel and Emma for an inspiring webinar today. Have a great rest of the day.
If you have been affected by any of the issues discussed in today's podcast, please reach out. Barod have a free and confidential live web chat service that is available 7 days a week on our website at barod.cymru, where you can chat to a trained support worker. Alternatively, you can contact Wales's National Drug and Alcohol Helpline, Dan 24/7, either by calling 0808 808 2234 or text Dan to 81066.